Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Hmm.
No? Let me restart.
Well, let me sign back in.
Okay. We're just waiting for Sabrina to join.
Hi.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. How's your day going?
Good. I just finished with work a little while ago and been looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, me too. I remember I did your workshop a few years ago, and I still hold on to some of the things that you taught me during that time. Um, and so I was even talking to James earlier today, and I was sharing with him how important this um, it is to open this dialogue and this conversation around attachment styles,
Mhm.
especially in the South Asian community. And obviously, you can speak more about that and why that is. But I know you and I know all about what you do. But would you like to share with our audience just a little bit, an introduction maybe?
Sure. Yeah. So you and I met back in, I want to say like 2018 or 2019. I can't remember exactly.
Pre-COVID is how
Yeah,
my brain is working right now.
exactly. And when you and I met, I mean, I was already on this path, right? So uh, I married my best friend and we were dating for 7 years before that, and then 2 years of marriage, and we got divorced. And I couldn't figure out why. I mean, yes, we got divorced, but and it didn't work, but I just wouldn't leave it alone. And as a behavioral scientist, like I had to know what happened. And when I dissected all the patterns, I realized that it comes down to attachment styles, and that none of our therapists, nobody in our families, none of our friends even knew or heard of like this term, and that this was driving it was driving the reason we got together, we got married, but it was also driving us apart at the same time. And this is exactly why we could never really figure out how to do conflict in a healthy way. And when I looked around, I realized, wow, my whole family and like his family and like everybody in our, community has some sort of the same relationship going on. It's just that because we don't talk about it and the stigma of airing your dirty laundry, this is what holds us back from moving forward as a community. We're all insecurely attached and we don't know how to do relationships. So
So
that's it. So what I do now as a result of all of that, so when you and I met, I was doing workshops, but now I actually do a 2 week personalized program for each client. And I have a team. I work with Zamir, who's a holistic counselor, and I work with Farah, who is a communication coach. And so they actually shift their attachment patterns in 2 weeks, and they could do it from home. So thankfully, with COVID world, you could be anywhere in the world and you can contact us, and in 2 weeks you could shift your patterns. It's remarkable and it's amazing, and it's so transformative. And I wish this existed before, because then maybe I wouldn't have had to go through my marriage and my divorce and the 5 years of healing after it.
I think we go through our own journeys and we're meant to go through our challenges to get us where we're meant to be. But what was really interesting to me as you were explaining your own journey there, so you were doing this work before you got married?
No. So I was a behavioral
Okay.
scientist, but I wasn't focused on like personal relationships. I was working corporate life, and I still do. I mean, I still have a corporate job, and that's what I do full time. And so in the corporate world, corporations are trying to figure out how do you build trust and how do we get, um, you know, like our customers to pick our product versus our competitors' products and things like that. But when you shift the kind of perspective into personal relationships, we're still human beings at the end of the day. So the way that we build trust is very much ingrained in our biology and our psychology from birth.
Yes. So I remember you mentioning are there four main attachment styles, four quadrants that you work with?
It depends which researcher and which study you reference, but generally speaking, I like to say that there's like three major ones, right? So two of them are insecure, and we all kind of fall on some spectrum of some combination of those two. The two are the anxious and the avoidant, and then there's the secure. And that looks and feels very different than the anxious and avoidant. And now, after working with this for years and working with so many clients, to realize we kind of get lost in these labels of anxious and avoidant, and it's almost irrelevant to talk about, like, are you an anxious or an avoidant? Because what's most important is to ask yourself, is this a secure response or an insecure response to the situation? And that's the gold nugget in everything, and that's where you're going to find that you need to transform.
I love what you say about lost in the labels, because in the spiritual community, in yoga and meditation, you get lost in the labels too. There's so many labels for everything, and everybody wants to categorize themselves in one category versus another. And this is what I practice. And so in my own journey, I've come to a place where I incorporate everything I learn, whether it falls in the category of yoga or meditation or it doesn't. If it works for me, and if it feels right, I will incorporate that into my practice and into my teachings. So, what has been your biggest challenge, would you say, in trying to work through the labels and all of that in society?
So I get a lot of messages saying, this is what my partner did. Is this anxious or avoidant? And that's when I kind of stop it and say, what difference does it make as long as it's an insecure response, right? And if you are having a relationship with someone, it's a reflection of where you are in your journey. And so what are you doing? What are you saying that is also kind of mirroring that? And so I try to break it down, and I still have posts about anxious and avoidant, just to, like, it's almost like the buzzwords bring people in because they're curious. And that's when you can have that real conversation. It's really incredibly hard to have that conversation in a post and say, stop worrying about anxious or avoidant, right? Because I think it's the mystery of it, or the curiosity, that brings people in, and they'll say, well, with this partner, I acted like an anxious, and this partner, I was more like an avoidant. And so then you kind of drive them to the answer and say, well, what do you think was going on there? What changed? And they'll come to the answer themselves. They're like, oh, it seems like I have a combination of both. And it's like, yeah, you do, but it's all still insecure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like there's no you can't box this, because it's behavior, and behavior stems from. So another thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I get your opinion on this, is where do you think this behavior it stems from?
So, I mean, behavior is an output, right, of the impulses that are going on in our mind and our body. And so it's really driven towards, like, feeling safe. And I mean, we learn to model our behavior after our parents, our families. So that's like number one, your parents or your family, and what type of environment you grew up in, how predictable it was. Did people learn to talk about emotions? Did they talk about what they need? Were they open and honest in communication? Most likely that wasn't the case, especially if we're told, don't air our dirty laundry outside. Can you imagine how many of us actually talked about our emotions at home when we were young? Probably not many. It was always like mind over matter, right? Little did we know that, like, mind is everything. So that's number one. Another one is, like, the stereotypes, the gendered stereotypes we grow up with. And then a third one is the marriage that our parents had. That imprints our minds so deeply that it becomes our unconscious blueprint. And that's what people often overlook. It's like, well, I had a great childhood. My parents sent me to the best schools. I was always, like, well fed, and I had all the clothes I wanted. And yeah, but what was going on between your parents? And even if they didn't talk to you about it, do you think that your body didn't sense it? Right? Of
I
course it's
love that.
possible for you not to know about it.
I love that you say that, because you're touching on spiritualism without even saying any spiritual terms or any spiritual labels, and this is what this whole conversation is about. This is what this series is about. Let's talk spirituality, because in reality, anything and everything in this world is spiritual.
Mhm.
We don't need to label it all as spirituality, and we don't need to, um, make it more than it is. I think the healing comes when we simplify things and we come back to the basics, like you just said, coming back to your childhood, taking a look at how is it that you grew up, what were you facing then that you weren't able to reflect on, and going back. So when you help people in these situations, what's like one thing that stands out to you that you want to maybe share and people can maybe learn something from?
So more and more what I've learned to kind of look at, or what I've found interesting after being in this work for as many years, what, like 5, 6 years now, it comes back to breath, believe it or not. And as I hear you talk about it, I think that's like the connecting part, right? Because our breathing patterns become patterned in childhood. So, for example, when I'm scared or I'm nervous or I'm anxious, there's a particular type of way that my body has learned to breathe, and which is usually shallow. And if that continues for a prolonged amount of time, I mean, that's the trauma itself, right? Because I can't even breathe deeply or fully. You don't really need any other trauma other than that. And it tells you that I grew up as a very stressed child, and that is how I've learned to navigate the world. And that's what I've come to expect from the world. And if I don't sit down and think and focus on the breath, then I'll spend my entire life that way. And it's really like, it's like a suffocating experience for your body, right? Because you're not taking deep breaths, you're not breathing fully, and then you can't show up fully in all your relationships. It's connected to everything. And so that's, for me, like that's been the most recent and just most potent learning, is like our breathing patterns get set almost in childhood, and they need to be undone then. And that's the work of a lifetime.
That's so amazing that you say that, and I'm definitely going to use that in my practices too. Um, it was funny, I was dealing with some anxiety maybe a few weeks ago, and I was talking to a friend, and I was just sharing, I don't know why it hurts to breathe. Like, I'm just feeling this deep, like, need to breathe, but it's just so uncomfortable to take a deep breath right now. And I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to ground myself. And it's so funny. He made it so simple for me. All he said was, um, your anxiety is just a lack of breath.
Mhm.
And it just clicked, something in my mind just clicked in that moment. And I realized that it was I don't know what attachment style this might be, but I was clinging to that comfort or that discomfort that I didn't want to get past. I wanted to sit in that energy.
Mhm.
And I'm going to touch back to what you said earlier about picking up on what's behind the scenes. So when you're looking at your parents' relationship or anybody in the household as your child, in any environment really, even as an adult, our energetic body picks up on energy. Even if we mentally don't realize or physically don't see it, our energetic body will pick it up and absorb that. So like the cliche that if you walk into a room and there's negative vibes, you're going to feel that, right? And it's so true. And you can see that in all aspects of life, in any situation. And you come from a completely different background than me, but we're talking about the same thing essentially. So that is so amazing to me.
Yeah.
Um, there was a question here I just wanted to touch
Yeah.
on.
It was, so the question was, have you ever read Yogic Science of Breath? And yes, I have, and I have a copy of it on my bookshelf. And I read that like so many years ago, over maybe 15 years ago. And like now when I see the connection between, attachment styles and breath, and now when I go for my meditation retreats and I'm able to meditate for 5, 6 hours a day, and the first thing you notice in like almost like the first hour, I immediately notice that my breathing pattern changes. And so our bodies know how to breathe. But again, like I said, you have to spend that time to undo all those patterns now.
Yes, and I always say that too is like our body's natural response is to heal. So we don't need to tell our body to send blood flow to a certain part of the body that needs healing. It naturally will do that. We just have to create that environment for it to do so. So
Absolutely.
that's true. If you go into a space where it's a space of healing or a yoga studio or a retreat, somewhere where it's high vibrations and natural healing is taking place, your energetic body naturally comes into that space of healing, and it's easier to let go of all that external and come back inside. So you mentioned that you meditate for multiple hours a day. How does that look like for you?
So I went to a meditation, like I found a meditation instructor earlier this year in May. And I got there, I was there for like 3 or 4 days. And the first day he had me meditate for 3 hours. I just couldn't believe it that I actually did that. I mean, I've always meditated for like 10, 15 minutes. There's been phases of my life where I can sit down and meditate for an hour, no big deal. Um, but I went from like doing a 10-minute meditation every day to like doing a 3 hour the first day. And it changed my life. I mean, I'm going back to see him again in at the end of this week, and I'm really looking forward to it because to know that you can do that is just so like for me it was like, oh my God, I think I found my sport. Like I was always that kid in school, like I didn't have a sport. I wasn't like kind of like dabbled around, wasn't really good at like any one thing. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is my sport, right? Of course, like that child that's still looking for that. But it was funny, but it was so rejuvenating, spending like 3 days just meditating. And like the last day I did 6 hours. And to, again, like I said, to know that you can do that, to witness your breathing patterns change, and then to know when you need another dose of it. It's pretty amazing, and I feel very fortunate to be able to do that twice this year.
Were you in complete stillness for that whole period of time where you meditating?
No, so what I found was interesting was like, of course, I'd sit down, close my eyes, and start the meditation, and then as the breathing patterns change, I noticed that I would have to like release tension from certain parts of my body. And so it's almost like I was naturally doing yoga poses without actually intending to say, like, I'm not going to say, I'm going to do a pigeon pose now. It was, and I just naturally started, the body naturally started to do that. And then when I came out of that meditation, I'm like, what just happened? I don't understand. And my instructor explained that yoga was created to prepare the body for meditation. So when you sit in meditation and your body notices that there's tension somewhere, it's going to do what it needs to do to undo that. And that's all that was going on. Um,
Yeah, so you just unlocked that yogic wisdom that's within all of us. And
mhm.
that's what my goal is as an authentic yoga teacher is to get my students to that place where they can tune into their body at a level where I don't need to instruct them and they can start to listen to their body and move through the poses themselves and listen, stretch, move, breathe. And
Mhm.
that's real yoga.
Exactly. And so I was kind of surprised and like, because he didn't tell me this would happen. He just waited, right, until, because he was in the room and he would hold the space for me to meditate. And it was just, it feels like I've discovered a whole new world.
Yes, and a world within, right? It's not an external world. It's a whole new world within yourself.
Hmm. And it
Yeah,
does
that's
have, an instructor or someone you can kind of not only just have the hold the space, but also like afterwards we'd talk about it and he'd ask me questions like, were there any new sensations this time? And so, I think after towards the end of the first day, I felt like my feet were like they were just vibrating. And I had never felt something like that before. And so he was really surprised. He's like, you're probably one of the students, like one of the fastest students I've ever had because almost nobody feels anything on the first day. And he's like, you're definitely on the right path. Like I'd encourage you to continue meditating. And, and of course, and then I came back and realized I tried to keep up with it for a while. And then of course life kind of kicks in and I'm like, okay, I need another dose where I have this for a few more days and then hopefully I'll be able to sustain it at least for more than 10 minutes a day when I come back this time.
yeah, it's a practice, right? Something we keep coming back to. And I always get a lot of questions from my students too, like how long do you meditate or how long should I meditate? And my answer is always meditation's on off switch. You don't sit down to meditate and you get up and your meditation's turned off. No, you take that with you, right? You
That's,
build that environment, and then you take that through your regular life, and you make choices from that meditative centered state. um, Conversations are yoga, so this is a form of yoga that we're doing. We're expanding the mind. We're, you know, I'm taking in what you're saying, you're taking what I'm saying. We're grounding that energy into the physical. And so that's a form of yoga, a form of energy healing, energy practice.
mhm.
And so James is asking, can you give an example of a mindful breathing exercise? What's maybe your favorite breathing exercise?
Um, I don't really have a favorite breathing exercise. I do have like, so let me just go back to I'll comment on what you just said about being able to stay centered in that place. What I found is that after I healed my attachment patterns, it is much easier for me to contact that space, stay in it, spend most of my days in it. I rarely get triggered. I never, I shouldn't say never, but I rarely ever have the type of reactions to the extent that I used to when I was an insecure, anxious attachment style. It's been such a marked difference. Like it's like a before and an after in my life, sort of like COVID, right? Um, and I feel like a completely different person. I, it would be wrong for me to think that like I would have been able to do any of this before healing those attachment patterns, because it really has to do with how comfortable and safe you feel in your body, right? I mean, I find that most people are not able to meditate probably because we didn't grow up feeling safe in our bodies and to go within, because we were always hyper vigilant about what's going to happen on the outside, what's going on around us, what do we need to be careful about. And so what I've found is that the piece that came from healing and shifting my patterns is what lent itself for me to even explore this area and go deeper into it than I was before. Um, and so I don't have a specific breathing practice. The one thing I do try to remember is exhale should be longer than the inhale. And that's how you just kind of slow your system down.
I love that. And I use that all the time too. I always say, lengthen the exhale, release the tension. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the tension and pain and tightness we hold in the physical body, it's most of it is actually energetic.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're able to exhale, and like you're saying, exhale longer than you inhale, you can actually start to release some of that tension. And I'm just thinking of a student who recently had a really cool experience with his third eye. So he was in a pose and he was feeling a lot of tightness, a lot of tension, pain in the physical body. And he said, I was just trying to breathe. And eventually he got so into the body where he was massaging the muscles and the tissues with his third eye. And this was after 2 months of one-on-one yoga practice. So I was just so proud to hear that he had such a um, big experience internally in his own body, in his own mind and energy. He was able to unify all three and really come inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds really powerful. And that's what I mean. It's like a whole new world inside. And it's nice to be able to connect with other people who have kind of trekked down that path and have their wisdom to share.
Yeah, it is really refreshing. James is asking, can experiences of racism or colonization link to attachment patterns?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's really about how our mind is kind of perceived and internalized it. So if we are part of a marginalized group, or our family has had like migration patterns. And so of course, if you're going to have migration, there's so much instability and uncertainty that it gets implanted into the way we breathe, the way that we raise our children, the way that we think about life, the way that we plan, maybe over plan. Um, and it limits how open we are to new experiences, right? Because we're we're surviving in survival mode. And if we teach our children to do the same thing even after we've made that shift, and they don't discover it for themselves that like I'm not living in survivor mode anymore and I don't need to live like that, then yeah, they're going to continue those patterns. And so it absolutely does have an impact, a huge impact on our attachment styles.
Yeah, I think for my own personal journey too, that really stands out. I've done a lot of ancestral work and own trauma healing in my own line, and it's so true. And I think back in the community too, as we're trying to heal all of these things, it really does stem from that survival mode. Being a first generation immigrant here, watching my parents go through that struggle, watching my grandparents go through the struggle, and now finally being at a place where I'm able to have the freedom, I have the privilege of, being able to open my wings and fly instead of having to, scramble to build the foundation for generations to come. And that's what our parents did. And I think it's so powerful in accepting that and honoring that. Yes, there was polarity of we are here today, we have the privilege, but we had to go through a lot of trauma and we have to heal a lot of that trauma that came with that. And so I don't know if you have anything to share around that topic, please do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had to do a lot of my own work, right? Because think about it, our minds got programmed between the ages of 0 and 8. And so even though our parents and our families are so much better off today, now that we're like in our 30s and 40s, our mind thinks the way that it did when they first arrived. And so even though they have grown and maybe changed, but what got implanted or imprinted on our minds is like from 30 years ago. And we use that mindset to make our decisions today. So a lot of what I see in our generation is like a lot of us don't take the opportunity or the risk to, like, let's say, move away from home or go live in a different city or try a different career, because we're so bound to like, what are my parents going to think? They're never going to approve. And so then we, constantly chase that approval, and we don't realize that we are free, and we don't set ourselves free in that way. And then there's this internal conflict of, do I do what I want to do, or do I do what my parents want me to do? And how can I let them down? They've had so many sacrifices and this, that, and the other thing. But what we don't realize is that a lot of what they've said in the past, and even if for many of us, what they continue to say today, is out of an insecure attachment style. And so if we want to create a new pattern for the next generation, we have to set ourselves free first. You can't say, I'm going to continue trying to please my parents and then have my kids be securely attached. Can't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm laughing because I see this happen in my own extended family all the time. Like we raise our kids the same way we experience our relationship with our parents, even though we may want to change that, but subconsciously we will do exactly the same thing if we don't accept and realize what's happening and what we need to change.
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
Yeah. What do you think, like as a collective, like one thing we really need to heal in the community, generally speaking, or maybe from your own personal experience, anything that's coming up?
Wow, that's such a vast question. I can think of so many things. So, like, obviously, this idea of like, I don't belong or we don't belong or we need to live in, survival mode, that's definitely one.
Mm-hmm.
I would like another one would be equality between, men and women and equity. And like, let's start, cleaning that up a little bit. Because like for me personally, my mom started working with my dad when I was 12, so I saw them go through that transition, and it was tough for a few years. I, but when my dad went looking for a wife, he never thought that this person was going to become his business partner one day. He just lucked out that it worked that way. When he needed a business partner, there she was. But then when I got married, it seemed like all of those expectations of like, you're the bride or you're the girl and we're the girl's parents, and like this idea of there being a power play, right? With the guy's side, or like the guy's parents are like more important, or we need to honor them with gifts and all this stuff. Like that took us back a couple centuries. And I'm like, this makes no sense because I saw my parents as equal partners in the business and in life. And then when my wedding came around, like it almost felt like I was talking to a different set of parents, or like, maybe my great grandparents, the way that they were going about it. And it was uncomfortable, right? And I asked them, like, why are you doing this? And they said, well, we want your marriage to start off as, best as possible. And we have to give these gifts and we have to do things like this. And it's like, no, we need to wake up. And this is not how you've raised me. And this is why we had so many conflicts, is because I wasn't used to any of that. And they kind of went, back to their old traditions and culture. And I think all of that needs to be updated.
That's so powerful that um, they progress so much. It sounds like, the way you explained, they've progressed so much in society and, broke down all those barriers of equality. And then at one point or another, they fall back. And I feel like that happens to all of us in one way or another. We always, there's one aspect or one area in our life where we just go back to that. Oh, but that's the way it's supposed to be, and that's the way it has to be. Like, I can't change. I can change all of these other things, but
Yeah.
that's my weakness.
And it's usually related to tradition and this fear of like things not working out because I didn't do it the right way, right? So then all their insecurities came up again.
Yeah,
Of,
fear.
hey, and we're trying to do the best for our child, and if this doesn't work, then what are we gonna, say, or what are we gonna think about ourselves? And so all of that got in the way. But thankfully, after my divorce, even they have grown significantly, and like we'll never make those mistakes again.
So another topic that just kind of came through this conversation, and that's why I don't like to, script these or have questions pre-planned, because I just want the conversation to flow and the energy to, freely form as we're talking. So an interesting thing I found recently is that when we're starting to let go, whether it's pain in the body or trauma in the body or traditions, anything we're trying to let go, our mind starts to fear.
Mhm.
And I've realized that it's this fear of, if I let go of this, I'm going to forget the lessons, the challenges that I've experienced, whether it's me or my generation before me. I'm going to forget all of these things, and life is going to get too chaotic and something bad is going to happen.
Mhm.
Do you find that as well with your attachment styles? People are starting to let go, and then they fear that if I let go of this, something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It does have to do with an insecure attachment style, and it's because we haven't given ourselves a chance to kind of do our own thing and feel our own way into things, right? So, for example, if we are the type of family or person that always sort of follows the rules and gets advice and consensus, and like, that's how we make our decisions. So then kind of trekking out on our own is extremely scary, and your body will let you know that, like, this is new, this is uncomfortable, you've never done this before, what are you doing? And so all these thoughts, but they're actually sensations that we give thoughts to, right? Of like, oh my God, the uncertainty is so unbearable. And because we generally resort back to what we already know, the body never gets to experience newness or novelty or that risk taking to know that it'll be okay. And so those patterns of, consensus making or like going along with the herd, they just become stronger and stronger. And so that's why we find it even harder to break some of these molds or some of these patterns when we get older. It's because we haven't given ourselves chances to do that when we were young, when
Yeah.
they're probably lower.
Yeah, for sure. A solution that I've found that helps people to kind of start to um, let go little by little is not to think that, oh, I have to let go of this all turkey forever. Just drop all the bags right now. No. So you just let go little by little. So even if you're sitting in meditation, you can think to yourself, okay, I'm just going to let go of this attachment style or this insecurity or this trauma that I know I have to let go of. Just let it go for the moment. Let it go
Mhm.
for the breath. Let it go for the day. Let it go for the hour. And do
Mhm.
that every day, a little by little, and just start to notice how your body starts to ease. And it's easier to start letting go of things that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you will notice is like as you are letting go, what you're actually doing is you're allowing yourself to experience the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
sit in that discomfort. Like people come to me like, what am I supposed to do? Just sit in it? I'm like, yeah, just sit in it. Practice sitting in it. And that sounds like exactly what you're saying, right? Like whether it's 5 minutes a day or, and then you slowly inch on up and you become more and more comfortable with experiencing discomfort.
Yes, and that is the only way I think that things that are this big, and especially things that are family related and generational, like generational trauma, we can't just let it go in one day or in one, okay, I'm gonna let it go, and it doesn't just go away. We have to slowly chip at it little by little.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The breathing helps, especially, right? Because when you're triggered, what can you latch onto? And
yeah,
that's really what we all have.
yeah, that is so powerful. Do
Mhm.
you have anything to say about superstitions? James just said superstition.
I guess I'm curious what kind of, I guess for my parents, it was a lot of superstition, right? Like if we don't do this as the girl's side, so then like her marriage is gonna fall apart or I don't know, whatever. Um, I don't really have much to say in terms of like, I think that a lot of them were probably created to keep many people in line and following the herd and kind of hurting the community or whatnot, right? So I think there were belief systems that were set up in the time that they originated.
Do you think there's any new superstitions or belief systems created like that in our new generation that we're doing to ourselves?
I don't think that there's uh, superstitions, but I do think what we're starting to see is like a breakdown in understanding what reality is.
Mm.
And have such polarized groups, right? Like take a look at COVID and the prism of perspectives that it's created. And I think that there is a lot of fear around people starting to believe things that you might not be comfortable with or that you don't believe and that you feel like you see accurately. But with the whole conspiracy theory and that sort of thing, I mean, there is something about it that it's fulfilling a need of some sort, right? And so generally what I see is that people get triggered when someone is drawn to that sort of stuff. And I think what we really need to do is take a compassionate view and say, hey, there's something that they're getting out of this. Like what could it possibly be? Maybe it's community and connection. Maybe it's meaning and purpose. It could really be anything. And this is just being fulfilled in this way. And so there's no reason I need to kind of degrade it or like, ridicule it or make, just make, you know, try to like tear it down. Um, I think that that's what's going on for us is like, imagine if like the old superstitions came back. You know how we kind of brush off our parents when they say like, oh, you shouldn't walk under a ladder or you shouldn't do this, that, and the other thing. Like, I feel like we treat this stuff in the same way. Like, this can't possibly be true. Like, what are you doing believing this stuff? But you know what? There's a human need that's being met. And I think that's what's most important.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like also, like in our generation, there's a fear of being right or wrong.
Mhm.
Um, for some reason, people are really triggered if ideas don't match, or if you can't see. I feel like people can't seem to agree to disagree and just respect that people have the right to their opinion and a right to, you know, what they believe and what they think. There's this really big need, especially right now, to argue and to argue your point and to like shove it down somebody's throat. And I think that stems from a lack of essentially third eye awareness, perception. So being able to, for me, third eye is all about being able to open your perspective to see what somebody else is trying to say and respect it enough to sit back and you don't have to take it in and you don't have to internalize it, but you can still respect that this is a whole person in front of you saying what they need to say, and this is how they believe, this is what they believe in, and respect that and say, okay, that's great that you were able to share that with me, and that widened my perspective,
Yeah,
and still be able to disagree with that. um, and and I think that stems back to being insecure.
absolutely. So I really like how you said like people are, they have this need to be right, but that comes from childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when, if you look back, if people have the memory of childhood and they can remember like points of conflict where they were made to feel like they are wrong. So then when these things come up in adulthood, and they fight back even more strongly, because what the mind does is it looks for past situations where they have had the same sort of sensations, and now is like it's coming up even stronger because I mean they're an adult, they're more powerful, that sort of thing. And so it's kind of like nobody can tell me that I'm wrong anymore. But what you're really fighting back, or what you're really fighting, is like those childhood moments of emotion and when you weren't heard and you weren't validated. And so that's what I see a lot, is like that need for approval and that need for coming up like really strongly because it wasn't met in childhood.
Yes, that is so powerful the way that you put it. And I really hope that people that are watching this are taking something, because I think we all struggle with that at one point or another. I'm not perfect, Sabrina. I'm sure you're not perfect.
No.
And we all go through our own journeys and our own
Yeah.
lessons. And it's so important to open your mind and just take in, accept what you need to work on, get help.
Mm-hmm.
And, take teachings from all sorts of people in all sorts of walks of life. There's no right or wrong, and there's no right way to heal. There's no wrong way to heal.
Absolutely. Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
what you saying. It's like what works for you, that's your path.
Yeah, and that changes, that evolves. So maybe today you need to go for a walk, and tomorrow you might need to run,
Mhm.
like.
Yeah. Yeah. You're a changing person and your needs are changing. And maybe when you've fulfilled those childhood needs, like you can move on to something else and move to the next level.
Yes. Any last pieces of advice that you want to give, or any last comments that you would like to share?
I think there was this one other question from H. Singh. It says, what do you think about people wearing masks and how people aren't talking about the effects that it may have on one's health? You know, I think the masks thing it's such a minor thing compared to like the suffocating breath in our body from childhood, from like told that we're wrong and that we can't, think our own way. And, many of us didn't have parents that were okay with us disagreeing with their perspectives. What do you think happened to our breath then? So I think like there are, so to say, like bigger fish to fry and like really, uncover those. And if we can heal those, then like, I don't really think the masks, limit our breathing. Hopefully you're not wearing it all day, but even if you are, I don't think that it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, and if you are, experiencing difficulty in wearing a mask, take it off, take a breath. Like, no one's gonna shoot you for doing that, right?
Yeah,
Go to a place where you have some space around you, no one's around. Maybe go outside and take a few deep breaths, and then continue on with your day if you're required to wear the mask. I mean,
right.
I'm not in a position to change any policies, so I
Yeah,
can't really speak to that.
yeah. But thank you so much for having me on here. This was such an interesting conversation. I think we covered a whole lot.
Yeah, no, I love that we were able to talk about something completely different and bring it back to spirituality, breathing, yoga, and that is really the purpose of Let's Talk Spirituality, is to bring different people from different walks of life and see how everything interrelates to everything else and the
Mhm.
oneness of the world.
Exactly. That's all there.
Thank you, Sabrina.
All right. Bye, Apneet.
Take care.